They called it the Vanishing Point, and the Yuba County Five never returned. They called it the American Dyatlov Pass. 5 young men, 1 frozen mountain, and a discovery so disturbing it still haunts investigators to this day. When search teams pried open the door of a remote forestry trailer in the Sierra Nevada, what they found was unthinkable. Ted Wire, wrapped in sheets like a corpse prepared for burial. His beard grown long enough to prove he'd been alive, alone, for weeks. Beside him, dozens of empty food cans. And yet, stacked in a nearby locker, enough supplies to keep all 5 men alive for months, untouched. No fire had been lit, no attempt to escape, only silence, and Ted slowly starving to death. But Ted Wire wasn't supposed to be there. Neither were the other 4 men. Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Gary Mathias. On the night of February 24th, 1978, they were just 5 friends leaving a basketball game. They weren't hikers. They weren't survivalists. They hated the cold. And yet, their car was found parked 50 miles into the snow-covered wilderness. Perfectly fine. Keys missing, no footprints. It was as if they had vanished into the trees. In the days that followed, rescuers searched. And then, one by one, the mountains began to give up their secrets. 2 bodies, frozen, curled up in the snow. Another partially eaten by animals. But Gary Mathias, the 5th man, was simply gone. No one knows why they went there. No one knows why Ted didn't save himself. And no one knows what happened to Gary Mathias. Even today, there are only theories. Some say it was panic. Some say it was psychosis. Others whisper it was something darker, something out there in those woods that night. But before we can answer the question of how they died, we have to understand the night they vanished. Because that night, nothing about the Yuba County Five made sense. February 24, 1978. The 5 young men were laughing. They had just left Chico State basketball game, their team victorious. Spirits were high. They grabbed snacks for the drive home, candy bars, sodas, everything stuffed into their pockets. By all accounts, it was supposed to be an ordinary night, but it would become the last night 4 of them would ever be seen alive. Witnesses later recalled seeing them pile into Jack Madruga's turquoise Mercury Montego. They weren't reckless. They weren't the type to wander off. But at some point between Chico and Yuba City, they disappeared. Hours later, deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains, their car was found. Perfect condition, no signs of distress. And here's the strangest part. The car wasn't stuck. The gas tank was nearly full. The keys, gone. It was as if the 5 men parked their car and simply walked into the snow. When investigators first saw the scene, they were baffled. No broken glass, no footprints around the car, though the snow was deep enough to preserve them. And then came the first theory. They panicked. They thought the car was stuck. But that doesn't explain why they didn't turn around, why they didn't walk back toward the main road. Instead, their tracks, later found, led deeper into the woods. almost as if they were following something. The next day, their families were frantic. These weren't drifters. They had plans. Gary Mathias, in particular, had been expected home, his favorite sneakers still sitting by his door, yet there was no sign of him, or any of them. For months, the case went cold, until spring came and the snow began to melt. In June, searchers found the first bodies, Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. They were lying side by side just off the trail, frozen. But this wasn't where the nightmare ended, because miles away, in a Forest Street trailer, what some would later call the death cabin, they discovered Ted Wire. He had survived the longest, weeks, maybe even months. But here's what no one can explain. Ted had access to food, enough supplies to keep him alive indefinitely, but he never opened them. Instead, he starved, slowly. And Gary Mathias? His boots were found near the trailer, but Gary himself? Gone. The mountains had swallowed him, or someone had taken him. And then came the discovery that would change everything. A set of footprints leading away from the trailer, disappearing into nothing. To this day, no one has explained where they lead, or why the 5 men, afraid of the cold, ended up on that mountain at all. But what came next would make this case even darker, because hidden in the official files was a detail investigators never wanted you to know. A detail that turns this disappearance from a tragedy into something far more terrifying. For months, the Yuba County Five case was nothing but grief and unanswered questions. But behind closed doors, investigators held back one piece of information, a detail buried in their own reports. And when it surfaced, the entire case changed. Inside a locked drawer at the sheriff's office, an officer uncovered a note. It was written during the early days of the investigation. The note described a witness, a man who had been driving through the mountains the very night the 5 men vanished. He claimed he saw something. 5 figures, walking single file into the snow, not back towards safety, not toward the highway, deeper into the darkness. When he rolled down his window to yell at them, they didn't react. They didn't even look at him, like they were in a trance, he later said. The police dismissed it. They said stress made him confused. But there was something else. The man swore that there was a 6th figure, a shadowy figure walking behind them. And this is where Gary Mathias comes in. Gary was different from the others. He wasn't just a friend. He had a history. Gary had served in the army, and while stationed in Germany, he was discharged after a series of violent incidents, brawls, blackouts, and hallucinations. Doctors diagnosed him with schizophrenia. But here's what no one talks about. Even with his condition, Gary was sharp, brilliant even. And the others? They trusted him. He was their leader. If Gary said to follow him into the mountains, they would have done it, without question. Which brings us back to the witness's 6th figure. Was it Gary, or someone else entirely? As investigators dug deeper, they discovered something chilling in Gary's apartment. Folded maps, circled areas in the Sierra Nevadas, and a single note scribbled in the margins. "We'll get there, we'll be safe there." What did it mean? Was Gary leading his friends into some kind of delusion, or had someone told him where to go? Police never answered that question. Instead, they buried the file. But when it leaked years later, former detectives started to talk. And what they revealed is the part of this story that no one, until now, has been willing to say out loud. According to 2 retired officers, there were rumors of a cabin in the woods, hidden off the main trails. Not the forestry trailer where Ted was found, another one. And this cabin, according to one anonymous officer, said wasn't just a cabin. It was a place people weren't supposed to find. But when a search team was sent to investigate, they were ordered to turn back. No explanation, no report. The file was stamped resolved. And this is where the Yuba County Five case crosses from tragedy into conspiracy. Because if Gary led them there, if someone else was in those woods, and if law enforcement stopped the search, then this wasn't just a disappearance. This was something much darker. And the proof? It wouldn't be found for another year, when a hunter stumbled across something in the snow. Something that should have ended the mystery forever. But instead, it only made it worse. Almost a year after the Yuba County Five vanished, the mountains finally thawed. Snow melted, and the woods gave up a secret. A local hunter, familiar with every ridge and trail, was moving through the wilderness. He wasn't looking for the missing men. He was tracking deer. But what he found wasn't an animal. Just beyond a narrow, overgrown path, he spotted something pale against the dirt. At first, he thought it was bone. He was right. A human hand. He backed up, heart pounding. Then, just feet away, another shape. Torn clothing, sun-bleached fabric, and then a skull. The hunter ran, straight to the nearest ranger station.
Within hours, search teams returned to the mountains, and what they uncovered was even worse. 4 of the Yuba County Five were found, or what was left of them. Jack Madruga, Jack Howitt, Bill Sterling, and Ted Weir, the one discovered in the forestry trailer. But here's the part that will keep you up at night. The remains weren't all in one place. They were scattered. Ted was in the trailer, starved despite having food all around him. The others? Their bones were spread across the snow as if they had been dragged. And Gary Mathias, the one who might have been their leader, he was gone. No trace, not even a bone. Investigators searched for answers, but what they found only raised more questions. Around the bodies, they discovered footprints. Not just the 5 men's, larger, heavier, like someone else had been there. And there was more, a torn wool blanket, not military issue, not from the forestry trailer, an outsider's blanket. Who brought it? And why was it there? The hunters who lived in the area swore they had never seen anyone else that deep in the woods. So if no one should have been there, then who was? Forensics ruled the deaths as exposure. The official explanation was simple. They got lost, they froze. But here's the problem. The food in the trailer, dozens of sealed rations, was barely touched. Ted Weir's feet were frostbitten so badly he couldn't have walked there on his own. And despite that, his beard had grown almost 15 inches. He didn't die in a day. He didn't die in a week. He had been alive for months. Months. Starving. Alone. While someone, or something, was out there. And then came the most disturbing piece of evidence of all. Inside the trailer, on a table near Ted's body, there was a single item no one could explain. A gold watch, not belonging to any of the 5 men. Whose was it? Where did it come from? Police called it irrelevant, but one former deputy swore it was logged into evidence and then vanished, just like Gary Mathias. When the hunter who first found the remains was interviewed years later, he said something the police never put in their official report. I heard movement that day, before I found the bones, like footsteps. But when I turned around, there was no one there. Coincidence? Or proof that someone was still out there, watching even as the case was solved? Because the deeper you go into the Yuba County Five, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't just 5 men lost in the snow. This was a trap. And Gary Mathias might not have been a victim. Gary Mathias was different. Not just because he was the only one never found, but because of what he carried with him. Secrets the others didn't. Before the disappearance, Gary had a documented history of schizophrenia. He'd been discharged from the army because of it, and while he was medicated, there were nights, his family admitted, where he'd go missing for hours. No one knew where he went. When asked, Gary would simply smile and say, "I was with a friend." But no one ever saw this friend. The night the Yuba County Five vanished, witnesses saw something strange. At a convenience store 70 miles from home, the clerk claimed 5 men came in. They bought snacks. They laughed. But she swore there was a 6th man, tall, bearded, standing at the door. Police dismissed her. But when investigators pressed her later, she never changed her story. She wasn't with them, she said, but he was watching them. And then came the footprints. Investigators only admitted this years later. Near the forestry trailer, beside the tracks of the 5 men, were impressions from a larger pair of boots. They didn't match Gary. They didn't match anyone. It was as if someone had been leading them or following them. But here's where it gets worse. Ted Weir's body, the one who starved in the trailer, showed signs of care. His beard had grown long, yes, but his nails were neatly trimmed, and he had been wrapped in sheets. Someone had been there, keeping him alive, watching him die. And what about Gary Mathias? His shoes were found in the trailer. He was barefoot in the snow. Why? Some believe Gary snapped, his mind fractured in the isolation. He might have taken the others deep into the wilderness under a paranoid delusion, and when they died, he wandered off, barefoot, into the snow. But others believe something far stranger, that Gary didn't wander off. He left with someone, the 6th figure. Here's a detail buried in an old FBI file. Months after the case went cold, a man matching Gary Mathias's description was allegedly seen at a bus station in Sacramento. Thin, wild-eyed, and he wasn't alone. Witnesses described him with a man in a heavy coat, face hidden beneath a hood. When police arrived, they were gone. Coincidence? Or proof that Gary Mathias didn't just vanish, he was taken? And then there's the thing no one talks about. Ted Wire's gold watch, the one that didn't belong to any of the 5 men. When private investigators dug into pawn records years later, they found something disturbing. A similar watch was pawned in Oregon. No name, no ID. But the clerk remembered the seller. He didn't look right, like he hadn't slept in weeks. And he kept looking over his shoulder. When they showed him a photo of Gary Mathias, the clerk froze. "That's him," he whispered. But there was another man with him, and I'll never forget those eyes. If that's true, Gary Mathias may not be dead. He might still be out there. And if he's not alone, then neither are we. Because whatever or whoever that 6th figure was, he's been waiting. And maybe, just maybe, he never left those woods. Some call it Plumas National Forest. Others call it cursed. Over the decades, the area where the Yuba County Five vanished has been a graveyard for the lost. Hunters, hikers, loggers, dozens of cases, bodies never found. But there's one story, buried deep in local folklore, that has never left the people of Yuba County. Years before the 5 disappeared, an experienced outdoorsman named Harold Keyes vanished in the same region. He was a survival expert. He knew those woods better than anyone. But when searchers finally located his campsite, it looked wrong. The fire had burned down to ash, his gear was neatly packed, and just a few feet away, his boots were sitting side by side, as if he had simply walked out of them. And from there, nothing. Not a footprint, not a trace. Now, compare that to the Yuba County Five. Shoes left behind, tracks leading into nowhere, and Gary Mathias vanished without a single sign of struggle. Almost as if the mountain itself had taken them. But then came the sound. Search teams reported it first. Volunteers, trained officers, even a few locals. All of them swore that in the dead of night, out in those woods, they heard whistling. Low, slow, almost playful. When one deputy followed the sound, it stopped abruptly. He radioed back, saying he felt watched. Minutes later, his radio went dead. They found him the next morning, standing in the snow, dazed. He had no memory of how he'd gotten there. And here's where the theories turn from tragic to unexplainable. One investigator, retired now, swears the 5 weren't just lost. He believes they were led, lured deeper and deeper by someone or something they trusted. Why else would 5 grown men, all familiar with rural California, abandon their running car and walk into the wilderness in the dead of night? Why else would Ted Ware, freezing and starving, not light a fire in that trailer stacked with paper and wood? Unless he wasn't alone. Unless whoever was with him didn't want him to. And if you think this is just folklore,
2 years after the five vanished, a logging crew reported a strange sight.
A tall man, barefoot, standing at the tree line, watching them. They shouted at him. He didn't move. When they got closer, he turned and walked straight into the trees. No footprints, no sign of him. The loggers quit the next day, and to this day, they won't go back. Here's the part that nobody wants to hear. The FBI files on the Yuba County Five aren't just incomplete, they're sealed. And inside, according to one whistleblower, there's a single photograph marked "Do Not Release." The description? Unidentified male, taken on trail cam, Plumas National Forest, March 1979, the same month the search for the five ended. No face, just a silhouette, 7 feet tall and standing barefoot in the snow. The mountain didn't just take the Yuba County Five, it waits. And if you go deep enough, if you walk far enough into those woods, you might hear it too. That low, playful whistling, getting closer. Because the Yuba County Five weren't the first, and God help us, they won't be the last. We've reached the end of the trail, but what if I told you the trail doesn't end? Because the Yuba County Five didn't just vanish. They left behind a puzzle so disturbing that every theory only makes the case darker. Some experts insist this was nothing more than a tragic mistake. The men got lost, panic set in, they wandered into the woods until exhaustion claimed them. Simple, logical. But there's one problem. The footprints. Investigators followed them for miles, and then they just stopped, as if the five men walked off the face of the earth. Tracks don't just vanish unless someone or something erased them. Locals whisper about the Watcher of Plumas, an old folktale, a presence in the woods that calls to the lost. And remember, Ted Wire's body was found inside that trailer, blankets tucked around him, beard grown out, almost like he'd been taken care of. But who? Or what? If this was simple survival, why didn't he eat the canned food beside him? Why didn't he burn the furniture to stay warm? Unless he wasn't alone. And then there's Gary Mathias. No trace, no remains. Some say he ran, delirious from the cold, and was never found. Others think he made it out. One retired deputy swears that months after the search ended, he saw someone who looked exactly like Gary standing on the edge of the forest road at dawn. When he blinked, he was gone. And then there's the evidence no one wants to talk about. We already know the FBI locked portions of the case away. But why? One former investigator claims the Bureau received a series of anonymous calls during the search. The caller? A man. Calm. He described details that had never been released to the public. He told them where to look. And each time, he was right. When they finally traced the number, it led to a payphone in the middle of the forest. And here's where it gets worse. Satellite images of the area show something strange. A patch of land, perfectly circular, where no trees grow. It's not marked on any map. It's not on any logging report. The locals call it the Vanishing Point. And the last known ping from Gary Mathias's shoe-mounted pedometer, right in the center of it. 5 men went into those mountains. 4 were found dead. 1 was never seen again. And if you think this case is over, go to Plumas National Forest, stand in the silence, and listen. Because sometimes, just sometimes, you can still hear it. The crunch of footsteps in the snow, the faint sound of whistling echoing through the trees. And if you hear it, don't look back. Because the Yuba County Five may be gone, but the mountain isn't done. Not yet. If you think you know what happened to the Yuba County Five, tell me. Was it a mistake? A cover-up? Or something that still walks those woods? Leave your theory in the comments. And remember, this is only one of America's strangest disappearances. Subscribe, because next time, we go even deeper.